Welcome to Just One Q, the podcast where we explore the latest ideas in workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion in conversation with thought leaders and experts. Each episode, a guest and I dive into a question that highlights their area of expertise. The goal is to leave you with the tools and insights you can use to make your workplace better and more human-friendly. I'm your host, Dominique. I'm a DEI educator and advocate working for Dialectic, an inclusive workplace learning consultancy in lovely Guelph, Ontario, which is situated on the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional lands of the Chinoochton and the Haudenosaunee peoples. Today, my guests are Jamie Woolf and Dr. Christopher Bell, both leaders at Creativity Partners, a consultancy with a focus on unleashing trust and innovation through constructive disruption. 30 years ago, Jamie Woolf was brought on by Pixar Animation Studios, and they were stuck in a rut. Ideas weren't surfacing, superficial harmony replaced meaningful debate, efficiency was stifling new insights, and the company's success had bred a mentality of risk aversion. Jamie really helped the iconic company find its way back to a truly innovative culture as the first director of culture there. Today, she is a renowned innovation cultivator, speaker, and she brings over 3 decades of experience practicing organizational psychology and executive coaching as the founder of Creativity Partners. Drawing on her impactful work with organizations like Google, DreamWorks, Gilead, the University of California, and Pixar Animation, she has inspired thousands worldwide to embrace innovation as a catalyst for personal and organizational transformation. Alongside Jamie, Dr. Christopher Bell serves as president of Creativity Partners. As a nationally recognized award-winning TEDx speaker and scholar, Dr. Bell focuses on helping audiences discover the power of storytelling in building healthy relationships, workplace cultures, and organizations. For over 2 decades, Dr. Bell has been redefining the idea of diversity training in organizational practices on college campuses and in companies including AT&T, the United States Air Force Academy, Pixar Animation, and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Good morning to both of you and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
So our main question that we're going to tackle today is a bit of a spicy one, I'd say. We're asking, how can you tell if you are a bad boss? And I think it's a really important question because, as we all know, bad bosses are a scourge. And they really do have major impacts on both people's lives, their families' lives, and on the achievements of organizations. And unfortunately, there are seemingly so many ways to unintentionally be a bad boss or a leader, and being a good one can be a little bit mystifying. So my hope is for this conversation that it allows you, our listener, to reflect and conduct a little self-assessment, and that it provides some guideposts for you if you're trying to change your style. So Jamie and Chris, before we jump into talking about bad bosses, I would love to hear from each of you in turn. What sparked your interest in workplace wellness and leadership, and how did you get here?
Well, I thought early on that I would be in clinical psychology, and that one-on-one relationship was rich and meaningful. However, when I took my first organizational psychology class, I thought, this is interesting because the systemic focus on psychology seemed even more meaty for me because so many people spend more time at work than they do even with their families. And it felt like a fertile ground for creating more health, more well-being. I'm an only child. My mom was a single mom and a teacher, and work was just so demoralizing. She was a fantastic teacher and very artistic and creative. However, the system really broke her down and led to burnout. And so I grew up watching that and felt all the more that, work really is a place where we either fulfill our potential or get beaten down or somewhere in the middle. So I thought that would be a really interesting place to work.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm a child of a teacher too. So I know the story, and I hear you in terms of just there being more levers for change in organizational environment rather than a personal one, or like the interplay is when you're just taking it that level higher, you have way more interesting dynamics to play with and to work with. So I hear that. Dr. Bell, how about you?
I definitely backed into this space. I spent from really the second year of college all the way through my early 30s. I worked in residence life and housing on college campuses. And I started that job because I didn't want to pay for my housing. And it seemed like a good way to get into it. And along the way, all of this leadership development training just sort of comes your way. And you're sort of steeped in it all the time and you don't really notice how much you're learning. But by the first time I lived off campus as a grown up, I was in my 30s and I was about to get married. I always lived on campus. And so I was always in these environments full of people who were in leadership development and really were all on the same page and all sort of thinking in the same direction, and everyone was making each other better. And it was this really great environment. And then I left and I moved off campus and I got, into a PhD program and I lived in the quote unquote real world. And it occurred to me that the real world is terrible. And I like all of the things that I loved about my community in res life didn't exist when you left the university environment.
Yeah.
People out here are dealing with so many other things that naturally go away when everyone is in a leadership development mindset. So I started doing EDI work because I was really discouraged by how people were treating other people out here. And over the course of doing EDI work, I began to realize that EDI work out here also is terrible. And a lot of people doing EDI work are doing it in ways that are exacerbating the issues rather than making them better. People hate diversity training. They just hate it.
Yep.
And I came from a position of, I can't train you to do anything about diversity. Like everything you are ever going to know about diversity, you already know. You're making conscious choices. This is not unconscious whatever. You're making conscious choices. And so I started to redefine the way I was thinking about diversity training, and people really started to gravitate towards it. And I guess I sort of backed into this space of like, well, this is what I'm going to do. So I'm helping people out. And at this point in my career, I'm in a space where I don't even do EDI anymore. Everyone's so big about, EDI stuff. I just do I. Because if you do I, the D and the E will come along with it. And so for me, it's all about making spaces where people can bring their full selves to the room. And if I can make that happen, then all of the other leadership development stuff will flow from that. And it'll be a really positive environment for everyone.
Thanks for expanding on that. I personally would love to just take the conversation and veer it right off track and talk more about that, but maybe that's a conversation for another episode. I do want to ask you, and you've touched on this a tiny bit before we jump into sort of unpacking this bad bosses thing, what is your utopia? If there were no bad bosses, or if everybody kind of took the advice, if everybody was on board, and I think your answer about campus life kind of touched on that a little bit, but what could work actually be like? In other words, what are we working towards here?
I feel like I have seen microclimates of really healthy workplaces. I've yet to see an entire company that really cultivates that consistently throughout. But there are pockets where I would say the utopia I've seen, and fortunately even experienced, is where everybody has full agency to do their work, to have autonomy, to be trusted, to be creative, to share wild ideas without fear, to be able to challenge each other, but with respect, and to be imaginative, to be playful. Those are all the things that happen when we don't over-index on efficiency and profit.
Yeah, I love that
idea. And we don't have a big power imbalance. That's one of the things that we're exploring deeply, is the barrier that is created from big disparities of power.
Yeah, I love the idea of playfulness because it just stands out as something that is absent from most workplaces, I would say. And when you think about, work being the play of adults, or, I've heard that that's sort of a goal, or that it's how it should feel ideally, and it so often doesn't. So that's an interesting framing of utopia. Chris, do you have anything to add to that idea of, what the utopia would be if there were
Yeah.
no bad bosses?
I mean, you did sort of. I'm gonna let it go, but you did sort of push the on button of my soapbox a little bit,
Oh, okay.
in that I am the hugest proponent of play in the workplace. I think that a lot of people get stuck in this sort of like work sucks mentality, and I think it's because people make work suck. Like there, and it doesn't have to. Uh,
Mm.
our environments can be so much more conducive to people bringing their best selves to the table, and that's a lot of the work that Jamie and I do. And it's because we always think if we want more work out of people at work, so we give them more work to do, and that's not how it works. If you want more work out of people at work, you have to give them space to play. And there's a lot of scientific research behind that. It's really sort of the cornerstone of my own work, my own academic work, is the concept of play. I don't think work is play, and I think that's a bad way to think about it in a lot of ways. I think work is work, but work should be secondary to play in so many ways.
Mm.
Work is literally outside of the natural order of things. It's make believe. It's a thing humanity invented, and so play is not. Play is natural in the animal kingdom, in the natural world. And so if we want people to work more, we have to tap into who they are fundamentally, and that is people want to play.
Mm.
And the more we can find spaces at work for people to play, the more work they will actually do. That said, my utopia is a space where someone wants to go to work and doesn't have to go to work. That's the bottom line. Whatever job you've chosen, I want you to want to go there. And if you don't want to go there, that says something. And so all the other stuff is sort of ancillary and exterior to that. If we can make our workplaces places where people feel like they wake up in the morning and they want to go and do something and contribute and be productive and add something to the world, that's the utopia for me.
Yeah. And that's such a high bar, right? For bosses, for leaders to have that utopia in mind as they approach their teams. I mean, what a transformational thought, I think, for a lot of people. Of course, we all, want these good workplaces. We want to go to work, and we want leaders to help us get there. So I want to ask you, turning our attention now toward these bosses, and in many cases, unfortunately, bad bosses. How do so many bad bosses get to the top of organizations? What is it about our workplaces, or maybe other systems that are external to workplaces, that allows this to happen?
They learn how to play the game.
Ah,
That's how they learn how to play the game.
well, tell me more.
Our workplaces literally sort of support and reward and encourage certain kinds of leadership styles, certain kinds of leadership behaviors that are, as Jamie said earlier, profit driven. They are outcome based. They are based in results, and so on and so forth. And as anyone who is a student of history knows, the best way to achieve is to just throw human suffering at it until it's done. That's how every great achievement has been achieved. The pyramids, the White House, the American railroad system, you just throw human suffering at it until it's done. And then our system itself rewards that.
Mm.
So it's like we have this amazing, telephone technology. How do we have that? Because the place where they make this, people jump off the roof. Like, it's so ingrained in our lives, in our systems, to be rewarded for punishing other people. And we both come out of the animation industry. There's a lot of talk about this, about sort of working people to the bone to get what you want out of them, and as long as the result is good, it's okay. It's fantastic, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And someone who learns how to play that game, play that system, learns how to, maneuver that system, rises to the top pretty quickly. It's an indictment, really, of our entire leadership structure, the way we think about leadership culturally.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything to add there, Jamie?
Well, I think to have some compassion for leaders, I think that leaders are under tremendous pressure because of Wall Street, because of shareholders, because the incentives are all wrong. So it amplifies what Chris has just been saying, but the incentives really are for short-term profit. And when you talk about, cultivating long-term trust, it actually does make sense for the bottom line, because then you don't have turnover as much and you have loyalty and you have people who are working joyfully, playfully, and fully because they feel they're trusted and they're fully seen as a human being. In the animation industry, we talk about you're just a wrist. If you just feel like you're a wrist, drawing pictures, and then they spew you out and lay you off, it's pretty hard to jump up in the morning out of bed and do your best work.
Absolutely. I love the combination of these two perspectives, the incentives and all the rewards being sort of lined up to promote this kind of behavior. I think there's also something around, advantage blindness too, where leaders are sort of unaware of their own advantages over others, or have a sense of being removed from the experiences of the people that they're working with, or unable to access through conversation because of the power dynamic and the differentiator there. So that all of these factors are kind of conspiring, but it's really interesting to hear you talk about this as if it's a solvable problem. So that's very exciting to me, and I hope to our listeners as well. And, to that end, you've sort of developed this self-assessment tool for leaders to help people take stock of how they're doing. And I'd love to work through this little accountability exercise together and see what happens. So I'm going to read out the first question in the assessment tool, and then we can sort of break it down. It is, when was the last time someone disagreed with you and you listened? So break that down for me. If the answer is never, or I can't even remember, what does that really mean about a person?
Well, one of the things that I was so impressed by when I met Ed Catmull, who's one of the founders of Pixar Animation and was the president, he always said two things that resonated. One is, the higher up you go, the more distorted the truth. So he recognized, and he said often, as the president, people aren't going to come and challenge me and tell me the truth. That is a problem. So he recognized his power. He didn't have power blindness, and that is rare. And then the other thing he often talked about is that constructive disruption is necessary for creativity and high quality work. And so we need structures that incentivize that cultivate that, because the path of least resistance is not that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you're talking about kind of creating intentionally structures that sort of invite dissent, or that invite maybe hard feedback.
Right. And really role modeling that you want to be challenged and you invite that challenge. The first time you smack someone down because they disagree with you, no one will ever disagree with you. But if you role model, wow, I completely disagree with that, but I want to understand more. And you actually show that you're rethinking your positions, and you've got curiosity, true, sincere curiosity to hear people's ideas, even if they challenge the status quo or challenge your thinking. Now you start to cultivate trust.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I want to, excuse me, I want to pause for a second, because I want to be really precise with the language a little bit, because it's not necessarily about the invitation, right? We can have as many open door policies as we want, but if there's not an actual understand what Jamie and I have started to really in our own stuff talk about as power literacy, if there's not an understanding of how power actually works in your organization, you can say open door policy all you want. People still aren't coming to you. Like, if my healthcare, if my my mortgage, my family depends on me bringing home this paycheck, I'm not challenging you on nothing, because I want to keep my job. So it's not just saying, oh, I have an open door and come and tell me whatever you want. It is actively and publicly calling for people to disagree. And when people do disagree with you, publicly making that okay, publicly making a show of listening to that. And that's not saying you have to do everything that everyone brings to you, but you have to publicly consider the dissent and then make a decision that reflects the fact that you actually took the suggestion seriously. It's not a passive thing. You can't just say, I have an open door. It's an active process. You have to actively do the thing.
Mm-hmm. I've heard this is sort of bringing to mind when I'm thinking about how you might sort of operationalize this. Something that is quite common is, in meetings, for example, either speaking last as the leader or, doing an activity where it's like somebody's wearing the black hat. These are kind of common ideas in leadership lit. And I'm wondering what you think of those. Is that, I'm sure that doesn't kind of cover what you're talking about, but does that sort of approximate that? Or are there other ways that we can be intentionally operationalizing this?
One of the things that we did at Pixar is instituted something called the Pixar Peer Pirates. And so Ed, the president, because he's the one giving cover, right? He created a system where we turned the organizational structure upside down, and non-managers were nominated in their department. So because they were trusted, Peer Pirates' job was to go around and listen to where the problems were, where the challenges are. And those peer pirates then were given permission, and it was part of their job, to bring those challenges to the executive suite. So that's just an example of things that feel a little more robust than black hat. Now I have the black hat, but is it really structural or is it a gimmick? Speak Last, I do think, has tremendous oomph. Again, another example at Pixar is the chief creative officer and the president did not speak at Brain Trust for 12 minutes. They experimented with that. And they did see that people who didn't normally speak were speaking up, and they weren't priming the audience toward their point of view. So I think that is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing that the last place that I was full time at, the leader in the room would never leave a meeting unless they asked the person who was taking notes what they thought about what we were talking about that day. And intentionally opening the space for the least powerful person in the room to say a thing, which is another one of our questions down the road here a little bit. But if the least powerful person can dissent against the most powerful person in the room, that's what I mean about making it active in public.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's great. And then I think, the second question ties into this, so I'm just going to put it out there. The second question is, when was the last time that you got tough feedback from your team? So this is a slightly different concept because it's feedback rather than just a disagreement of opinion or sharing ideas. And this question kind of brings me back to a conversation I had a couple months ago with Aiko Bethea, who does a lot of work with Brene Brown on the themes of accountability and so on. And she said that good leaders really crave accountability, that it's not just a nice to have. It's like you actually really, really want it kind of deep inside of you. So I'm wondering, how do we operationalize this one? Like, what are the things that you can do as a leader to get that accountability that you want from your team, to get tough feedback, to make sure that that's happening and that it's not sort of like manufactured in a cutesy way, like the black hat thing. You know what I mean? How do we do it genuinely?
I've done a ton of 360 feedbacks, and I'm going to push back on Aiko a little bit. I have seen leaders who have a yearning for true feedback, but I've also seen more leaders who the ego is a very fragile thing for us human beings, and they deeply do not want to hear the negative feedback. It is an affront to their sense of self, and they supersize it and they get defensive. And so if 360 feedback has teeth, meaning there's accountability mechanisms for change behavior, there's a connection to promotions, to other rewards. I think then you start to see, a culture change. But man, I've seen so many leaders who get super armored up and defensive when they're given the true feedback.
Yeah. I mean, in Aiko's defense, she's saying good leaders crave
Right.
accountability.
Yes. That's a definition of a good leader. I truly want to hear
aspirational. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
aspirational. Yes.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, and it's a thing Jamie and I talk about a lot. At the risk of maybe being a little blunt, we got to get rid of performance reviews, man. Like that, the whole performance review system is really flawed and outdated. It presumes you're good at your job and that you then have the ability to evaluate who's not good at their job. Where I think if we can get more into a mindset of we're going to have this space where I'm going to give you some feedback about how I think you're doing, and you're going to give me some feedback about how you think I'm doing, we both then get that feedback. We both then get to grow. And I'm in the position of power and you're in the position of not. So it's on me to make that space available and accountable and safe for both people in that room. And if that's not happening at your workplace, if performance metrics are a one-way street, you're already halfway down the road to being a bad boss. And that might be structurally, that might not even be your fault. Like you're being put in a position to be a bad boss just by the system itself.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's like I said, I mean, maybe that's a little blunt, but it's that doesn't make it any less true.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think like another connected idea, something that's come up a lot in, work that I'm doing around multi-generational workforces is the idea too of blending the direction of mentorship, where it can be sort of across levels of experience and age, and that mentorship can flow in both directions. And we have to stop thinking sort of unilaterally about things like expertise and feedback and all of that. Yeah.
There's so much that these kids know that grown-ups don't know, and what constitutes a grown-up is such a shifting landscape as it is, right? I'm learning that as I get older. It used to be kids were kids and grown-ups I thought of as grown-ups, but now my daughter is about to graduate from high school and everyone's like, oh, she's an adult. And I'm like, no, she's not. Like, she doesn't know anything, like, And so the older I get, the more what constitutes young shifts for me, but she knows so many things that I don't know. And she's going to go into a workplace in the next few years here. She's going to college, obviously, next spring. But like when she comes home from school or whatever and graduates, she'll be going into a workplace where right now, today, before a day of college, there are things that she knows that I don't know, And so this idea of being open to that as a leader, being open to the fact that maybe these young folks who are in your entry level positions or just moving up into their first little management leadership spots or whatever might actually have knowledge you don't. That's a vulnerability that I think leaders really need to embrace and tap into. Mentorship does not have to be a one-way street, and there are many, many things that you could learn from the people who work for you.
We actually we changed our mentorship program at Pixar to a mutual mentorship program for just that reason. And it was so meaningful for the mentors to learn from people who have very different backgrounds from them, because the higher up you go, the more white, the more male. And, suddenly they're shadowing their mentee and seeing what it's like to not be the most powerful person in the room. That's a great antidote to power blindness, because now this person they're advocating for, it's like, whoa, you're treated really differently than I am in the room. And I'm seeing it firsthand, and I'm curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is I love that you brought in that sort of the hierarchy, because it ties into, again, the next question. So I'll read that out, and maybe you want to take a first stab at that one, Jamie. So the question is, does your inner circle look like a carbon copy of you? Are those you solicit advice from, promote, elevate a lot like you? So, again, we're getting back to this idea of diversity, but you said it yourself, the higher up you get in the ranks, the whiter and the more male. And, all of these characteristics are still sort of in the workplace. So I'm going to put that to you. What are the sort of business risks of having that uniformity of opinion or perspective at the top?
Yeah. So a couple of things that come to mind. One is in our leadership training classes, we do something called the trust map so that leaders write names of who they're mentoring, who they give visibility to, who's their confidant, who do they go to for advice. And we ask them to look at the trust map and see if there's any patterns. And it's always an aha. Like, oh my gosh, everybody has like similar level, similar ethnicity, similar age. I am in an echo chamber. So first we recognize that. But there's so much research, truckloads of research, which I'm sure you know well, of how much better teams perform when they have diverse perspectives. They're more rigorous in their thinking. They make more sound decisions. Maybe there's not that superficial harmony because, it's a whole lot more comfortable to be with people like yourself. But there's a huge cost to that. And the research spells it out very clearly.
Yeah. Chris, do you have anything? I mean, I feel like diversity is sort of up your alley in terms of you're not even using the word anymore. You're talking about inclusion, but I'm wondering, what do you think about this? Like, what are the practical ways that we can make sure that, our inner circle isn't a carbon copy of us?
Let me bring in my cultural studies professor hat for a second. A lot of how we operate is very natural. It's very natural. 25,000 years ago, I needed you. Like there were things that could happen to us and I needed you. Like I can't hunt by myself. There are people who live on the other side of the woods who could come in here and stab us all in our sleep. And, the animals are trying to kill us. But I needed you. And so I needed to be able to tell who were the people who were in my family cluster, in my clan, in my group, and who wasn't. That was for survival. That was for safety. It is 2025. I don't need you. In a very real way, I don't need you. I need you if you work at Domino's. I need you if you keep my Netflix on, but in a very real way, I don't need you. Except it has been socially programmed in my cultural DNA for 25,000 years to need you. And so what do? Well, we just pick an artificial thing to rally around and we rally around it. And so the more the boxes you can check off, you look like me, you talk like me, you dress like me, you act like me, you're from the same place as me, you're my same gender, you're my same race, you're my same social economic class, the more of those boxes I can check off, the more like me you are. And the more like me you are, the more I can identify you as a part of my group, and then I can pull you in. And by the same token, the less boxes you check, you don't look like me, you're not from my place, you don't speak my same language, so on and so forth, then the more I have to push you to the outside so that I can identify. Now, here's the kicker for that. The people who are on this side of the fence, the people who are like me, we're the good guys all the time. We're good and kind and smart and beautiful and awesome and all the good things in life. And if you're on the other side of that, you obviously can't be good and kind and smart and awesome and all the cool things in life, because if you were, you would be like me, and you're not. So we get to be the pure and original people. You are the other with a capital O, and you are on that side of the fence. You are on that side of the room. You are different from us. You don't have to be a social theorist to understand this. This is what I just, with my own students, just call this the like me theory.
Yeah.
And the more like me you are, the more I have a natural tendency to want to put my arms around you. So the thing that we have to get people to understand is those boxes, those check boxes, they are artificial and they are arbitrary. And if we can get people to tap into the fact that those are artificial and arbitrary, and that actually people check more of the boxes for us than we think they do, then we can open up that circle. We can begin to trust. But the only way that we're going to be able to do that is to stop making it an abstraction. And that's why I've stopped doing the D and the E, and I'm only focusing on the I, because when you do the I, you have to necessarily sit down and talk to someone who doesn't look and sound and act like you. They can't be an abstraction. They have to be Jamie. They have to have a name. They have to have an identity. They have to be someone you interact with. That's the only way. People don't do that. They interact with the people who are like them. And then when it comes time for a promotion, well, guess who gets promotion? When it comes time for me to have a project I'm going to dole out to someone, guess who gets the project I'm going to dole out, and so on and so forth. It's not because I hate you. It's because I've literally never taken the time to get to know you or anyone like you ever. And that's the problem. So how do we expand that sort of inner circle? We do it by putting people in situations, by structuring our workplace, by structuring our work day, by structuring our organizational climate such that I have to interact with people on a regular basis who are not like me. And when that happens, necessarily some of them will get pulled into other people's inner circle. You cannot work with the same group of people all day, every day, in the trenches, in intimate settings, and not form bonds with people. The problem is everyone sitting around the table looks like me, and so then I'm only bonding with the people who look like me. That's how we fix it.
Yeah, I love the idea of shifting away from, trying to fix somebody's mindset, trying to, is rather than fixing their mindset, because a lot of people, they know the lessons. It's just an issue of access or
100%.
exposure or opportunity or whatever. So yeah, practical ways.
I come out of the academic tradition of rhetoric. Like I'm a trained rhetorician by nature, by trade. And one thing, when you're a trained rhetorician, you start to understand is for 2,500 years, we have understood this. You are never going to convince anyone of anything ever. Nobody wants to change their mind, and you are never going to change somebody's mind, ever. It's the wrong goal. And if that's your goal, you're going to lose 100% of the time. The only thing you can ever do is try to move people a little bit in your direction and let them figure it out for themselves. It's the only thing you're ever going to be able to do. And so trying to go in and change people's mindset is, you might as well go look for a live stegosaurus. Like you have a better chance of finding one. That's the wrong goal, but that's how EDI programs have been structured for decades. It's the wrong way to go about it. It literally is designed to fail. You can only move people in your direction. And the only way to move people in your direction is to put them in contact directly with people who are not like them and hear each other's stories, hear each other's points of view, hear each other's lives. It's the only way you can do it. It's the only quote unquote training you need. Is maybe today I mandatory force you all into a room where you have to actually talk to each other. Beyond that, I can't train you to do anything. You just have to listen.
Yep, you're cutting close to the bone because, this is a lot of the work that I do is in that world of DEI training. And we do push back on this idea of providing information as creating change somehow in people's mindsets. But I love this idea of, creating opportunity for people to have more exposure. How do you do that in ways that aren't cringy?
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. One of the things a couple of things. Number one is, and Jamie can talk a little bit about this as well, we focus on story for a reason. Our work focuses on story for a reason. We are sort of culturally trained to hear stories and process them in very specific ways. The problem with that is most people don't know how to tell a good story. And so a lot of what we do is we come in and we teach people how to tell a story better so that other people can hear their story, so that other people can be moved by it, right? If you can give them a little bit of structure around that, you'd be amazed how fantastic people's stories can be. Once you do that, once you move it into that space of we're not opening this up with, let me tell you about your white privilege. Like, we're not doing that. What we're doing is we're coming in and we're saying, I have a story, you have a story, and let's hear each other's places in the world. Let's hear how each other are seeing things. Let's hear, where your spot in the world is. It's necessarily not cringy. Like, it's necessarily personal and intimate. And, even when we tell people, don't share things, a little, put up with some, don't share everything about yourself in this session. Like, you are still at work, blah, blah, blah. we find people say pretty amazing things in those sessions. I've never left.
And I think it takes skilled facilitation. I think,
Agreed.
you don't want to do this at home on your own.
Agreed. Do not try this at
I
home.
think that we don't go straight to, we actually never go to tell us about your childhood. Like that's a terrible question to ask.
Oof.
And we have a very intentional way of building up the vulnerability and creating safeguards for the conversation to be organic. I love your word cringy. I just wrote that down because, yeah, there are so many ways to do this that are cringy. But if you give enough latitude for people to talk in the way that they feel moved to share and they feel safe to not share what they don't want to share, and you ask the right questions and you build up slowly to more vulnerability, and you know the kind of room you're in, all of that takes a lot of skill, as we all know, so that it's not cringy.
Absolutely. I'm going to move us to the next question. We're on question 4 of 5. So this is the question that you should ask yourself if you're a leader or about to be one. When was the last time you admitted you were wrong? It's a big one. I think obviously there's a lot of fear of being perceived as weak or incompetent or around admitting our own mistakes. And we're certainly being told to let go of that. I wonder, how do we admit mistakes maybe without giving off the I don't know what I'm doing kind of energy?
There's a lot of research around this too, is that when leaders share that they're wrong or they say, I don't know, they become more trustworthy, more likable. They don't become in the view of their team less competent. That said, the caveat is if you're early in career or you're a woman or you're a person of color, that plays in a whole different way. So you have to, this is again why we're teaching power literacy. Chris and I feel like unless you know the power that you're dealing with and have the skill of power acumen, you can really step in it. And I used to coach women, young women, like just be authentic and talk about your imposter feelings. And I've seen the backlash so many times. They don't have the confidence to be a leader. They don't have the confidence to be a director. So we have to know what we're dealing with. But if you are in a position truly of power and authority, it does go far to share when you truly don't know, to ask questions, to admit that you were wrong, to role model rethinking.
Yeah. In what spaces or formats can leaders look to actually do this?
Well, back to the 360 feedback, I think if leaders get feedback and share, I think I had a blind spot. I wasn't aware of this. I had one leader who was a director, and in the feedback, we pointed out that his body physically faces the men in the room. And he was mortified. He had no idea. And he shared that. And it was so powerful. I'll never forget it. And neither will anyone in that room forget that, this leader shared, like, we all have blind spots, and I'm so sorry. That will not, you're going to see change behavior. Hold me accountable.
Yeah, that's great. Any thoughts to add, Chris, on the idea of, admitting you're wrong or admitting mistakes?
I just think that point, this idea of pointing out your blind spots, recognizing them when they're understanding that if someone brings something to you, they're not making it up. Like, I think that's a really important space for leaders to understand. If someone brings something to you, they're not making it up. And so receiving that in the spirit in which it's given and understand, like, it happened to me. I do a lot of this work in the animation industry, and I was in a meeting and, we were talking about all of the different ways in which we were representing people in this film and blah, blah, blah. And someone raised their hand and they were like, that this world is literally designed in such a way that there are no disabled people here. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, the curbs don't have any ramps. There's no braille on the doors. There's no, handicap stalls in the bathroom. There are no disabled people in this world. Look at how many stairs are in just this one shot.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're like, oh, like that's not my reality. And so I completely didn't think about that at all. Like that's not my space. And I'm the EDI guy in the room. And I didn't even notice that, and forever now, it's one of the very first questions that I ask is, are there, are there ramps? Are there why are there so many stairs here? And why do the curbs not have, dips in them and so on and so
Yeah.
forth? That's my own learning. But I have to say out loud in that meeting, number one, I apologize sincerely. That's a thing you have to do. I apologize sincerely because I didn't see that. And also, now that I know that, I can fix it. I can't be mad at someone for something they don't know, but once they know it, then I can, right? Like I didn't know yesterday, but today I know. So anything I do from here on out is a choice. So if I don't recognize it tomorrow, I'm choosing not to recognize that because now I have the information.
Yeah.
I think being vulnerable just to that process, being open just to that process is probably one of the best things we can do as leaders.
Yeah.
To receive that in the nature in which it's given and then actually try to implement it in our lives.
Yeah. And I love the example that you've given just because it also showcases some of the words that you can use, right? Like actually apologizing sincerely, thanking somebody for bringing that to your attention, asking them to hold you accountable because now like these are all sort of words and intentions that you can set in that moment. So I really appreciate that example.
You can't get mad. You can't, like I said, someone can't bring that to you and you get angry about it because if you do, they will never bring you anything else ever again.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, the very last question in our little self-assessment is, does the least powerful person on your team feel valued and heard? And, this is something that we've touched on a little bit throughout the other questions, but I'm wondering, maybe Jamie, if there's anything that you want to say about practical ways that we can ensure that that's happening. I think a lot of leaders might actually think, yes, of course, they feel valued and heard, but we might be assuming that. How do you actually make sure?
Yeah. Well, I think what you just said is right on, is that that's where the biggest power imbalance is. And so there's a lot of risk in that person speaking up. And so it's being very strategic about how do I talk to this person and make sure they feel safe. And it's actively soliciting. It's not just like, do you have anything to add? And they're like, no, I'm good. So maybe you have to, really reach out in lots of different ways to peel the onion and get to the core of what that person really might bring, and in all sorts of ways, sharing that that they are in the room for a reason, they are valued, but asking once or asking publicly might not do it.
Yeah, for sure. Chris, do you have anything to add there?
What I would add to that is I think that it necessarily has to be a challenge by choice situation. You have to make the space available, and then the other person has to actually want to occupy that space. Forced feedback is not going to be genuine feedback. And so what you can do is you can offer the space up, and then you can make it very clear that that's a real offer. And like I said, the way that my former boss used to do it was before we'd leave the room, he would ask the person taking notes, hey, you've been listening, you've been taking notes the whole time. Do you have anything that you want to contribute? And if that person said no, he'd be like, okay, cool. And then in the next meeting, he would do the same thing. And in the next meeting, he would do the same thing. And if someone actually answered him, he would listen really carefully. He would respond to them in the exact same ways he was responding to everyone else who had talked before that. And that just puts it out there that he means it, that it really is your chance to contribute. And for a lot of young people, they're always like, oh, well, we don't have a seat at the table, blah, blah, blah. And he was opening up that space to be like, yes, you do. This is your seat at the table right now. Like you're literally sitting at the table. Just because you're taking notes doesn't mean you're not at the table, right?
Yeah.
But it has to be a challenge by choice situation. And so the best way you can do that is to make those appeals in the meetings, make those appeals when lots of people can hear you making those appeals. And then if someone does actually respond, to also do that in the meeting in public so that people can see that you really mean it.
Yeah.
And that will hopefully lead to other people joining it.
Absolutely. I'm wondering here, like we're talking a lot about people being heard, and the question is also about feeling valued. I wonder if there's like, is there another angle here? Is there another thing to consider? Not just that somebody has a seat at the table and feels like they have a voice, but that their contributions matter, like that their work on the team is really valuable. Like, how do you make sure that that least powerful person has that sense of dignity in their work?
I mean, one of the things that I love is John Powell's work at UC Berkeley. He talks about diversity and inclusion is all about co-creation. Unless you're co-creating what the goals are, what your job is, where you're going, and most organizations and most teams operate top down. They do operate power over. True belonging comes from if the least powerful person in the room feels valued, they have a part in creating what their job is, not out of nothing with guardrails, but and they're contributing to what the priorities should be, and they're truly part of designing the house in which they live.
Yeah, I love that. I love that analogy. That's really great. So now that we've walked through these questions, this little self-assessment, I wanted to ask, have you seen any actual examples of leaders turning things around? Like if they are in a rut and they are doing the things incorrectly, or maybe they would answer these questions negatively. What is the spark for change here, and how does it tend to unfold?
That's the good news, right? Is the good news is you can fix it.
I think we've seen many times we wouldn't be in this role, we wouldn't do the kind of work we do if we didn't see change more often than not. So, I am a true believer that people change and that most people want to be the good person and they want to do good by their people and they want to be trusted and trusting. And so many times we've created environments in which the feedback is flowing, the conversations, the curiosity, and people are growing and learning and co-creating together and course correcting on their own behavior. We often do in our team development work and coaching work, we start with a Hogan assessment where people do an assessment about what their derailers are under stress. And just that, knowing that we all have derailers and under stress, we're not our best selves. And it's under stress that we need to learn how to regulate the behavior that does come up when we're activated, because we will get activated. Work is stressful. And so we start there by having people understand, gain self-awareness that, when we're doing a million things and we're going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, we're likely to get volatile, or we're likely to get cautious, or we're likely to get perfectionistic, whatever our personality type is. And so how do we, in the moment, recognize that and mitigate it?
Yeah.
And that's where we see real change.
Yeah, I like this idea because it brings sort of the self-awareness piece, but also self-compassion. Like this idea that, you don't have to stick with your mistakes. You don't have to be defensive about it. Like we're acknowledging stress. We're acknowledging that everybody has these little shortcomings. So I like that as a sort of a spark or a starting point for change.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is sort of the good news about it, right? Which is, in my experience, most bad leaders don't know that they're bad leaders because they've been rewarded so much, and that's how they got into leadership positions. And when they find out that the people who work for them think that they're a bad leader, most of the bad leaders I've ever worked with have been horrified to find out people think they're a bad leader and they want to get better at it immediately. I think most people don't want to operate from a deficit. And if you think you're doing really well at something and you find out you're not, most people want to hurry up and fix whatever it is that people think is not working. So it is very rare that I work with someone who I'm like, here's kind of what everyone says about you. And that person's like, nope, they're wrong. I'm great. That's usually not the case. And if that is the case, then we've run into somebody for whom, what we try to do probably isn't going to work.
Yeah, if that's your boss, Godspeed.
If that's your boss, maybe it's time to update your CV. Most people, though, want to get stronger, want to be more effective, want to, earn the trust and respect of their team, and so they're willing to put in the work.
That is the great news. Well, as we wrap up here, I want to thank you guys so much for the contributions that you're making to the leadership and the EDI, or just the I space, through these important questions and conversations. I've really enjoyed all of the nuances that you've brought to this with your questions and the answers, and going a little deeper into each one. This is a bonus question that I love to ask at the end of most podcast episodes. And is there anyone else whose work you'd like to amplify? It can be, related to this work, or something that you find inspirational, something adjacent. Is there anyone out there that you want to shout out?
I'll start with Elaine Lynn Herring, Hering, has a book called Unlearning Silence. And I worked with Elaine. We brought her into Pixar. She's coached me and many others. In her book, I think she does a really nice job of helping readers understand what the calculus is in deciding whether, how, when to speak up, and it aligns with the work that we're doing.
Yeah, we have Elaine was a previous podcast guest as well.
Oh.
So if anybody's curious about her work, you can also kind of dig through the archives. It was just earlier in 2024.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. She's wonderful. So I'll echo that recommendation for sure.
Nice.
I think for me, there's a guy, his name is Paul Osincup, Osincup. He wrote a book called The Humor Habit. He and I go way back. We were actually RAs together as undergraduate students, and both of us sort of came up through the Res Life system and through the university system. Paul really talks a lot about how laughter actually transforms workspaces, and how if we can get into the habit of finding the funny in the work that we do, we will be much more productive, much more innovative, much more successful. He is very closely aligned to the work that we do about creativity and play in the workplace, and his book is really great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that recommendation. I'll be sure to drop some links to those books and authors in the show notes, as well as to your own work. So listeners, please take a minute to look up all of those goodies and stay connected. Jamie Woolf, Dr. Chris Bell, thank you so much for being here today and for bringing your energy and your insights to this important topic. I really, really appreciate it.
It was a great conversation. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for the invite.
And as always, I want to welcome any of our listeners to reach out to me if you'd like to be featured on this podcast, or if you have to sneakily nominate someone. My email address is in the show notes too. And if you like what you're hearing, please leave us a rating and review, or share the episode to your own socials. It truly does help get the podcast into more ears. I'm Dominique. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time on Just One Q.